So I have been informed by council that we have quorum, so I'd like to at least get started through the agenda. Give me 1 second. Does everybody have a laptop in front of them? Is it working? Yes. Okay. So the intent today is for you to be able to have access to the documents that are being discussed on the laptop in case you want to be able to highlight things or read along with them and participate that way. Long term, we're hoping to also have some meeting management software on here, so we're interested in your feedback on how this works, if it works, if it is something that provides an advantage to you. There are instructions that have been provided to you, but obviously since it's a new function, if you have technical questions, I believe we have folks in the room that will be able to support you in that process. Okay. Before we get into the meeting minutes, we have a couple of housekeeping items that I'd like to do. First off, Ron Romano from, he's the president and CEO of the New York State Industries for the Disabled, which is the not-for-profit corporation that develops and manages state and local government contracts for commodities and services for New Yorkers with disabilities. Has served as a voting member of the Procurement Council since December of 2008 when he was appointed by Speaker Silver. He served in that capacity until 2014 and has now asked to see some refreshed new blood on the council, and he has returned to doing his CEO function for NYS. So we wanted to appreciate his service to the council and just make note of that change. We also wanted to make note that Patty Kelly Sprague from the OGS team, many of you have worked with over time in being introduced to the council or working with her. You may not be aware that she is retiring next week. She was very clear that she wanted to finish out the Procurement Council sessions for 2017. She has played an indispensable role in organizing the meetings. She works on all of the smallest details. She really has been serving as one of the main conduits between you as the council members and my office. And we will absolutely miss her both at OGS and at the Procurement Council. So we wanted to take this time to appreciate her contributions and thank her properly for all of the help she has done over the years in getting this council to work. So Patty, thank you. And Patty's over there. For those of you looking to put a face with a name for the new appropriate administrative contact for the planning of these meetings, Judy Dorsman is next to Patty, and you can feel free to, corner her on the way out and with all of your concerns and complaints. Fair enough, Judy? Okay. All right, so the first order of business is the meeting minutes from the meeting September 20th, 2017. Are there any corrections to the meeting minutes? No. Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes from last meeting. Margaret Becker, a second. Ron Tascarella. All in favor, please signify by putting your hand up. Great, thank you. Are there any votes not in favor of approving last meeting's minutes? Are there any abstentions? Okay. Seeing none, the meeting minutes pass. Thank you very much. The next order of old business is to continue the discussion of the proposed definition on temporary personnel office. So staff to the Procurement Council, John is going to brief the materials in the place we are at now, and then we'll go forward with council discussion.
Good morning. As you will recall, during the Procurement Council meeting held on September 20, 2017, the proposed work group definition of temporary personnel office was presented, and due to several questions presented that needed research to respond, a motion to table until today's meeting was approved. So let me recap where we are in this proposal. OGS, as staff to this council, provided to you in advance of this meeting and posted on the website the complete proposed definition of temporary personnel office. This is what it looks like. This is the Word document with a couple of track changes. They're not changes, I'm sorry. They're just track comments. All right. You'll see there are references to 4 comments on that document. These references line up with the second document we provided to you also in advance of today's meeting. And it looks like this. This document includes just the sections of the definition sought to be changed by NYSED, NYSED's reasons for requesting the changes, and staff responses to those requests. If no one needs time to review, we'll move on. I remind you that the definition for the service of temporary personnel warehouse workers was previously approved by this body, and you are now considering the category of office workers. Since this definition relates to what the work group members determined are typical temp personnel hired in an office setting, the proposed definition limits the types of titles included to what the majority of the work group members found to be typical office workers. This work group also included representatives from the Labor Department and the Temporary Personnel Agency, and they agreed with the limitations proposed. As you know from the last meeting and from the letters sent to each of you by NYSED on October the 24th, NYSED objects to certain portions of the definition and would like this office worker definition to include positions which require a 4-year degree as a prerequisite to employment, such as accountants, actuaries, auditors, and social workers prior to receiving their license or certificate, as well as miscellaneous job titles and duties which include field work, surveying, ticket and temperature takers, test administrators, monitors and proctors, and bindery workers. As a member of the work group, I can assure you that the work group discussed each of these additional categories or each limitation at length over multiple meetings, hearing these very same arguments put forth by NYSED and good temps. However, in the end, the majority of the work group members that this council tasked with defining office workers, after spending a combined total of 350 working hours to develop this definition, felt that since the mission of defining the preferred source services offerings is to provide clarity and clear guidance to the purchasing government entities, it simply didn't make sense to allow job titles and duties that are not typically thought of as office temp workers to be included within a definition for office workers. Just as there is an approved service offering for workers under the temporary personnel warehouse workers that is defined and limited to workers working within a warehouse, the majority of the work group felt that the solution to addressing the concerns expressed by NYSED regarding the potential loss of jobs for people currently employed in the excluded job titles is for NYSED to submit one or more applications to the Procurement Council to add new service offerings under appropriate job titles that provide clear guidance to purchasing entities and not to include those positions in this definition. The last work group meeting was held over 3 months ago, and NYSED has known since that time that certain job titles they reference in the MTA contract were at risk, yet no application to add these new job categories has been submitted for approval, nor was an application for a replacement contract for the MTA contract submitted before it expired on September 30th. And to date, the OGS preferred source team has still not received an application for replacement of that contract. Finally, OGS, as staff, requests that the Procurement Council reject all changes requested by NYSED and that you approve the definition as developed by the work group and presented before you today.
Thank you, John. So this is now the appropriate point to open to the council for comment or action.
So, if I could, this is Joel Lombardi, ITS.
Is your mic on?
Oh, is it?
If everyone can remember to pull the mic to you when you speak. In addition, the button on the top should be pushed forward
There we go.
in order for the mic to be on.
In light of what just John spoke about, and what I heard in the last meeting, I'd like to motion to for a vote on the working group majority definition.
Okay. So there's a motion on the table to consider the work group definition. Is there a second? Margaret Becker from OSC and Pravina from ESD. Thank you. So with there being a second, now there is a motion on the floor. So that motion is now open for discussion for the council. Would any council members like to engage in either questions for staff to the council or in comment in favor or against the motion that's on the floor? Winifred. And just for clarity, even if I call you by name, if you could announce yourself and your agency before you speak for the purposes of the minutes, we would appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm Winifred Schiff, and my agency is the Interagency Council of Developmental Disabilities Agencies. So I still feel that the definition with regard to location, since particularly people with disabilities need maybe to work at home, or and it would the job duties themselves would fall under the definition, but the location requirement would make it impossible for certain people with disabilities to have these jobs. The other thing is the prohibition on the requirement of a 4-year degree. I think similarly, there are clerical jobs that would require 4-year degrees, and then people with disabilities would be unable to apply for those jobs.
Okay. On the first section, the location issue, can you point the council to a location where that is, that you'd like to discuss that? Is that just so that everybody can follow along where that is? Or if not, if staff can help identify that, that would be great.
I welcome staff's help there, but I'm going to look at it too.
Okay. I'm going to continue with comments, but I also want to find those two sections so I can make sure that council members know what those sections are. Okay. Do you have? Great.
Right. So it's in the very first section. Temporary personnel office or workers hired for a predetermined period to provide program support and assistance in a defined office environment.
Okay, got it. And the other one is, it looks like it's in section 4 of the notice to purchasing entities. Is that correct? The section that require a 4-year degree or higher.
Yes.
So section 4 is a listing of what the definition does not include, and then item B addresses positions that require a 4-year degree or higher. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So just to make sure the council knows what sections are referred to, we're going to try to do that. If you're looking at your laptops, the proposed definition of temporary personnel office, it's the second file that appears under the documents for today. And you'll also be able to see those sections on your screen. Are there any other comments, input, actions from the council? Margaret.
Margaret Becker, Office of the State Comptroller. I just have a follow-up question to Winifred's point on location. As I looked through the information that had been provided by NYSID, I didn't see locations that appeared to be other than where someone could go even if they could get to an office. They looked like they must have been subway platforms or test locations, so the location didn't seem to me to be precluding people getting a job. Am I missing something there?
No, I think my comment is more general, and I understand that NYSID's comments didn't have anything to do with people working at home, but it's generally that if the definition is adopted as written, then as proposed, then people who wanted to work at home would be excluded.
Sorry, Margaret, were you done? Okay.
If I could just...
Yeah, does staff have any input? And then we'll come back to comments.
This is one of the things, this is Noreen Van Dorn from OGS. It's one of the things we did discuss. And if someone has a home office, that could be a defined office environment that would be specifically included in the application, that the office, because you said it wouldn't change the titles, it would be the same titles, and they could say that the defined office is at a home location. So we think that it would be included in this definition.
And Noreen, that's from the work group content?
Yes.
Okay. So I will just put the question out there for consideration of if that's not clear in the document but was clear to the work group, that might be the issue for consideration.
Okay, and I'd like to add that that was one example, somebody who would want to work at home. I think there are probably other examples. You know, I don't have a list of them in front of me, but, and I understand that NYSED's objection was specific to these job titles, which are possibly on a subway platform, but, you know, there are other situations. So a home office would satisfy only one of the, you know, one facet of the issue.
Okay. And then so there is an opportunity if there's clarifying language or a suggestion about how that would be clarified, whether it would be clarified in guidance later or it would be clarified in the content of the definition, just to be considered. So, Pravina, I know I see your hand. Julie, I saw your hand first, and I saw everybody. We're going to get to you. Julie, would you go first, and then we'll come around the table.
Sure. I think actually, Noreen, you just answered my question. Sorry, Julie Suarez, Cornell College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. And my question was going to be what I think you just answered, which is that if in the job description somebody who needs temporary office workers simply defines the work environment as a home office or a test location, and it sounds to me as if you've already answered that and that you can define it that way. Is that correct?
Well, you could, as long as the type of a job is one of the approved ones. Test monitors is one that wouldn't be, because they're not, that's really not in an office. Test monitors, test locations are generally in large conference rooms, large meeting rooms, not office settings.
Thank you.
Amber?
Yeah, I think this is on. So,
Would you pull the mic a little closer?
Sure. The
Sorry.
Amber Mooney, Legislative Appointed Business Council of New York State. We understand the council's purpose in having a narrow definition of each of these, but the truth is that there's a very real changing nature of work that is happening globally. So I think that leaving that restriction in there, it definitely limits it and is going to be even more challenging moving forward.
Again, as comments come forward for that, what is the change that would accommodate that would be the question I would pose if there is a discomfort with the defined office environment section there. Ron, and then I'll come around to you, Pravina, and then we'll see if there are other comments.
I probably know the answer to this, but this definition is for this type of job. If I was looking at professional temporary services, that would be another definition, correct? We could have a second definition for professional employment.
Yes.
How would we go about putting that process in place to begin defining professional temporary employment?
Okay, the facilitating entity, whether it would be NYS, PSP, or NYSED, would...
Or Forklift.
I'm sorry.
No, they can't do services.
We can't do services, so that's fine.
All right.
But thank you for thinking of it. Sorry.
Failure for trying on my part.
Would submit an application, and as staff to the Procurement Council, we would bring the application forward. It would also have to be reviewed and approved by ESD as well.
Now, that's for an application, but these are definitions. Would we want to approve a definition of professional temporary services prior to an application? I guess I'm getting low. I understand the application process, but my understanding is these are definitions, not an application.
Right, but I don't know.
Right. But at some point in the past, there had been an application for a new service offering Just like we had one for PSP, what was the service offering that we
Data
did?
imaging?
For data imaging. They put in an application to get approval, that their check mark to do data imaging. So this would be an application to provide temporary personnel with whatever types of titles. And going forward, when new applications for new service offerings are submitted, there needs to be a definition that goes with that. And then that would be presented to the council. So it would be, again, an application to be able to provide new titles, and they would describe the types of titles that they would want included.
So the new definitions would be approved as part of the application?
Yes, yes. We don't believe going forward, in the past, we would just approve new service offerings without defining. Going forward, we need to make sure there's a definition of whatever that service offering is, what's included in that service offering.
I think there's a clarity I can offer. Application is being used in two contexts here. There is an application for a new service that would come up, and that application would contain a definition that would then empower that service to be included in specific applications for specific sites going forward. So I think that's the gap, is application is being used in two contexts.
Okay, that makes me, because I was thinking if I had an opportunity to provide temporary accounting services, and it clearly would require a CPA, I wouldn't make an application to do that. I would be making the application for
The goal would be to
opportunity
define the
and that
service
definition.
generally first, and then to have specific opportunities to provide that service that would go through the normal site-specific application process,
Okay.
or work-specific application process. Okay?
Yep.
Tom, give me 1 second. I haven't made it around to Pravina yet.
Hi, Pravina Raghavan, Empire State Development. I think I just want to reiterate something that Noreen said. We did spend a lot of time on the workplace definition because this was a definition for temporary personnel office as opposed to temporary personnel general. And so I think that the reason this definition was created was because we had an audit that said you need to create a definition. So I think the one thing in context of this is that this is specific for this one area as opposed to any definition and trying to include as much, which is where we get the lifeguard and the sub. I know we've talked about the lifeguard ad nauseum already, but that's the reason I think, the definition was in response to an audit that we have to actually get a definition out there that can clarify temporary personnel office and as opposed to temporary personnel in general. That's all.
Tom?
Tom Hipshin from SUNY. Back to Noreen's clarification, just make sure I understand in relation to Ron's question. Currently, are there professional positions that have been put in place by the old definition of general temporary services?
Go ahead, I've got.
Well, first off, there wasn't a definition before.
Right, well,
But yes, in the information, the documents that NYS has provided to us, they have placed people in professional titles. Because there wasn't a definition before, the procurement services team in approving those applications, really didn't have a way to say, well, these really fall outside of what somebody would think was an office worker.
okay, so if there's something in place already, there are people in those positions already. Are we required to, from the audit, to provide a definition to cover them as well?
That has been the suggestion for the past year and a half, which is, yes, that for, any positions that you're placing people, if they're going to fall outside of the definition, you're going to need a new service offering so that you can continue to place those people. We need to make sure that the preferred sources are providing the services that are approved by this council and not providing services that are outside the scope. So it would be a new, just like we've got temp personnel warehouse workers, now we have temp personnel office. The work group has decided that people typically think of an office worker as not being a professional and not being people who work out in the field. The solution is another application for temp personnel, field workers or test personnel or temporary personnel, test takers, monitors, and temp personnel professionals.
And I agree with all that, and I understand that. I guess my confusion is why aren't we discussing a definition for temporary professional? If we have people out there already, why aren't we trying to create that bucket? And I know this may be separate from this definition, but it just seems to me that if we have people in those positions already, we're not addressing them in relationship to what the audit is trying to do, is to give more clarity. It just, unless I'm missing something.
We discussed at the work group sessions that no one who's currently working under an old approval or an existing contract would lose their job. If there was a new application for professional type services, then we would go through the defined process and bring that forward. But we're focused right now on office temps rather than professional or field work.
And it would apply going forward. So there's
yeah.
not a requirement that there's a requirement that you define the service, not that you go backwards and define services around individuals at work under current contracts.
Okay. And just one other follow-up question.
Sure. And then Margaret, I saw you next, right?
Yeah. This doesn't have to be addressed right away, but I received a letter, I think probably everyone did, from Ron Romero yesterday late. Had a number of points that it concerning the NYSED's previous understanding about staff to the Procurement Council's idea of definition, and I would wondering if staff to the council would like to respond to those points. I'm assuming that you had seen those.
No.
So we did receive them, and I did distribute them to the team, but I am not sure that we have responses point by point available yet.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because it talked about location, location of the idea of office versus outside the office. So it would help me in making my determination
I don't know if staff has a copy of that material with them for us to look at, but we'll find out, Tom. Margaret, Margaret, you were next, and then Pravina, I saw your hand.
All right, so I think I wanted to make a point in response to Tom. This is Margaret Becker from the Office of the State Comptroller, but I think you answered part of it. So what I'd like to do is provide a little bit of background, because I think the audit that everybody's talking about is one that my office had produced, right? And so to clarify, you'll recall the Procurement Council, and I'm going to get the dates wrong, but it's going back a couple of years at least, was challenged to create specific, clear, identifiable definitions for more than just office worker. What the audit discovered was that definitions were sorely lacking, difficult to understand, difficult for agencies to implement, and therefore difficult to determine that actually the requirements of the Procurement Council and of state law were being met. And so the recommendation was to create clear, specific definitions going forward. Office worker is simply the last of those. I think Noreen or John, you mentioned that. And you'll recall that we struggled with other definitions, such as digital printing, such as laundry, which had similar difficulties for us because, we didn't want to strand anybody who might have been there or have an unintended impact. But I think in this case, I would just caution that the goal is to create a clear definition for this kind of worker and not to solve some other problems that come along. In fact, from my agency's point of view, we would very much challenge NYSED, VMTA, anybody involved with these contracts to make sure there is not an unintended consequence for those involved. And there are other procurement options, single source options, bidding for another tranche of people under another contract where they require that the existing positions be hired. And that can take place even while we're discussing how to continue with specific definitions and allowing the continuation of the conversation. So I just wanted to clarify where that audit came from, what sort of what the context of it was, and provide a little sort of broader perspective just for folks who might have been new.
So, Praveen, I saw your hand, but before you do, my understanding is there was perhaps the material that Tom was referencing was just passed out. Is that what was passed out? Because I'm not sure it made it all the way to us. But I know that if it was distributed to some council members, my understanding was that it was sent to all of the council members yesterday anyway. So not so much a matter of access to it, just as in terms of when the document came in, it wasn't provided with this package. If anybody on the council did not see it, there are apparently copies available, but we will enter this document into the minutes also because it was now distributed at the meeting. So, Pravina, do you have a...
Yeah, I just, so I know we're talking about this Pravina Raghavan, Empire State Development. I know we're talking about this particular definition, and we're talking about, like, I'm going to go back to subway workers and proctors and exams. I want to caution that the work group really looked at the office personnel in an office environment, given, what I'd call administrative support, for lack of a better terminology. And there is and just putting this into a definition without actually doing more analysis on some of the other areas that we're looking for, like test proctors, subway counters, there are also small businesses that own those contracts now too. So it's not just NYSED or NYSED who have contracts in there, and there wasn't an opportunity for us to ask other people, like, what contracts do you have in there? Because once we go forward, if we make this into perpetuity, those contracts will no longer be valid as well. So I just, caution trying to put everything in one fall swoop solution, because this is the last definition. Perhaps we do more definitions after this as part of what we do here at the council.
Yeah, this is the last retroactive definition. As new services come up for approval, they will just be defined at the moment of approval instead of us having to go backwards, take services that have been approved, and then adding definitions to them. So I think that's all we mean by it's the last one. It's certainly by no means probative of future definitions. It's just the last retroactive definition. So I want to make sure everybody gets their comments in. I want to be conscious of time. If your points have been already risen to, just be conscious of that as you're making your comments. But Ron?
Yeah, I hate to come back to this the second time, but I guess I'm still a little bit confused. What I'm hearing is that we have temporary workers who are professionals today. So if this is our last look back, why wouldn't we look back at those jobs too? I don't really have a problem with this definition. I'm just, I know I'm being a little slow here, but I just don't know that I understand why we wouldn't be also defining professional temporary services and bringing that definition forward as a look back as well, given that we already have those workers.
Well, the work group did discuss what are generally considered professional titles that are already approved, and the majority decision was that those titles should fall outside of this definition and could be taken up under a separate definition.
Correct. And that's my question. Why wouldn't we do that as part of this work group? Why wouldn't we be developing that other definition? Because I agree, I don't think you want this to be broader. I think this is fine. I think, for me, what's lacking is that we haven't also defined those services. Without that additional definition, you run the risk of implying that folks with a vision impairment or other disability are incapable. that they couldn't possibly be professionals. And I know that's not the intent, but by not bringing that definition forward as well, and it doesn't have to be today, but it's something I think the work group, and I'd be glad to volunteer to help with that, should be working on as well.
Right, I think we stayed as close as we could, like, to the instructions that we were given by the Procurement Council in developing the definition for temporary personnel office. When we set out, we tried to limit it. That's my recollection.
Right,
Well-
the concern is that the Procurement Council in the past had approved a service offering titled Temporary Personnel Office. And we didn't believe that the council would have the authority to define a different service offering, which would be temp personnel professionals or temp personnel field workers, because the work group doesn't have that authority, and there had not been an application submitted to the Procurement Council and the assessment done on the impact of a service offering on New York State businesses, which is one of the criteria that is done when this council looks at new service offerings. So we didn't think that we could just give a definition without going through the full Procurement Council process, approval process for a new service offering, which would be temp personnel, again, professionals, or temp personnel field workers, or test takers.
But where I'm getting lost is we already have those workers, is what I heard.
Yeah, right, the concern that we have is that the contracts that were submitted to OGS, apparently, clearly we didn't look at each and every title. Some of the contracts that were submitted have over 600 titles in them. So the fact that we, obviously approved something that we probably shouldn't have in the past, we're trying to remedy it. And again, the remedy is a new application for new service offerings that a council can assess and hopefully approve.
I think the primary issue is that applications for new services typically come to the council, not from the council, because they are typically then represented as services that NYSID or NYS PSP can provide. And I think that's what the hope was, is that there would be an additional application for those services.
Okay.
There's
I'm just going to make one comment and then let it go. It appears to me that we already have folks in those jobs. It would appear that we seem to be making it difficult or creating obstacles for folks with a vision impairment or disability to have who are professionals to be employed in this way. I don't know why we wouldn't create a definition which would apply to existing positions, and why we would segregate that out and say it's now a new job and a new position, and no, you have to start over and go through this from the beginning. So I understand, and the definition is fine, but in my view, we would appear to be making it difficult.
So just as a reminder, all of the jobs currently under contract are preserved in there. The only discussion would be, does there need to be a definition for those job titles if they were made available next time? So the hope is that there will be an application for that.
There's a process in the Procurement Council guidelines that's laid out. We, as staff to the council or as members of the work group, we couldn't bring forward an application or a definition outside of what we were charged with drafting or crafting.
Winifred, I saw your hand up, and then I want to be conscious of the time also.
So about the other definitions, because there aren't others, the problem with only having the office temporary position definition to use is that because of timing and expiration of a contract, 102 people with disabilities stand to lose their jobs that they've been in for quite some time. And, worse than that, all the people involved in the contract, which is 275, could end up losing their employment. So, it's just trying to use one definition when that doesn't really work for a particular contract that's, in question, is jeopardizing jobs.
We could react to an application for temp services to cover anyone who may be in danger if it's a more specific definition, or for, I guess it would be temp services field work, or whatever would cover those people. We weren't moving towards excluding anyone.
Mary Beth?
Mary Beth Hefner from Department of Health. I'm a little concerned about that because I think when you go down that line, you open up millions and millions of dollars of contracts that we already have for those kinds of services, for field workers, for surveyors, all of those kinds of things. So I don't know that that's going to be a simple hurdle for us to get over. So the idea that, well, don't worry about those people because we'll do another one of these things soon, I don't know that that's sort of a promise we can get anywhere near. But what I heard Margaret say, if I understood you correctly, is there are ways that we can sort of grandfather these people in, and so that we can sort of give them some sort of umbrella, at least for some period of time, until something else can be done. And it sounds like OSC is willing to be fairly flexible in that regard. And so maybe that's, and I don't know if there's a way for this council to sort of strengthen that umbrella by saying we as a council support any actions that would preserve the jobs of those people that already have jobs under the current or the previous non-existing definition, so that we can sort of protect them for some period of time. But I don't know that we should sit here as a group and say, don't worry, these guys will get covered under a future application, because I think the future application will be 10 times harder than what we're trying to do today.
And I would just caution the assignment of causality here. The timing of an expiration of a contract is not directly related to the action of this definition. Certainly had there been a renewal or another action or something that would predate this definition, there might have been an additional opportunity to preserve those, at least temporarily. So I just want to make sure I don't assign blind causality between the implementation of this definition and that this definition caused the expiration of a contract last month. But I agree with you that I think generally the sense is that there is a concern that there are people in current roles. There is a concern that there may or may not have been an opportunity preceding this definition to address it. There may be opportunities to continue to address those issues. And then the issue before us is the content of this definition. Exactly as you've described, there are potential millions of dollars of contracts already in flight affected by future definitions or expansion of the definition, and that is a critical component of the application process to make sure that that's addressed. So I think all of that feedback is very important, and we appreciate that. I think from a council perspective, unless there are specific changes, which so far I'm not hearing any. Are there any comments that haven't been made? Otherwise, there is a motion on the floor, and we can consider a vote. So, are there any other comments that haven't been made, Mary Beth?
It's more a question. So I think the two areas that we were most concerned with was location, whether it's an office environment. And it sounds like, Noreen, you provided a clarification that would add comfort, so that office environment can be not in the main office, but it can be in an alternative office. And the issue about a 4-year degree and requiring a 4-year degree. And I think the intent here is that, or the expectation is it would be very rare that a 4-year degree would ever be required, because it's really the word required that's there. So it would seem that if agencies understood that they shouldn't make that requirement unnecessarily, it would probably wash away most of the worries here. So is there any way that OGS, in publishing this, can add sort of a document that sort of helps people, guides them through those particulars, so that they don't trip and think office environment means only in the Corning Tower, or office, those kinds of things.
I think generally, yes, we would like to see authorized users use this correctly. And I think, certainly if we're moving forward with the definition, we don't have changes on the table today. As we go forward with this definition, I think the minutes should reflect both of those things as needing to be included in education and materials that are distributed to the authorized users from OGS or from any training entity, that should be included in the process. Is that acceptable to staff?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll make sure that is reflected in the minutes, and that is absolutely part of the direction that's distributed out to authorized users. Okay? Winifred?
I'm sorry, quickly. The office location clarification works, pending seeing what it would actually be. But the exclusion of the requirement for the 4-year degree, really, I think, I still feel that should be not part of it.
Okay. Are there any other comments or input? Tom?
I just want to reiterate that there was a question about whether staff to the Procurement Council originally agreed with NYSED's description about location and then has since changed its mind, and that would be helpful for me to understand.
So the material that was distributed yesterday, we have not gone fully through with council to review the citations of the comments that are in here.
Okay.
However, the perspective of the work group, which is driving this definition in the present, is that defined office environment, certainly with the caveats of if the natural intent of an office environment is to allow work from home, and it doesn't raise security issues or issues of what the data is that's being managed, that there is a natural extension to that, but not necessarily a natural distinction to any environment can be an office environment. There needs to be a defined component to that. So we will fully respond to this. I think the content of the current proposal is consistent with the work group. And we can certainly go back, but I don't know that we've had a chance to vet the citations that are in this document. So again, we got it when the council got it last night. So are there any other comments or concerns? If not, there is a motion on the table. So seeing none, there's a motion on the table. The motion is to approve the work group definition as provided by the work group. If everyone in favor of that definition could signify, if you're in favor of passing that definition, please signify by raising your hand. Okay. Staff, if you can just hold your hands up for a minute, that would be great. All right. With those council members who are opposed, please signify by putting your hand up. Fine. Right. Okay. And are there any abstentions? There's one abstention. Were you guys able to identify all of those? Can you report to us what the vote count is? do you count 10, 5, and 1? The way we did up here? Okay. So with a vote of 10, 5, and 1, the definition as proposed fails, which raises several concerns. The first one is there is a call out there for us to have a defined definition, which at this point there has been a work group effort, there has been a proposal on the table. There were no amendments proposed from the council. So if one mechanism for addressing this is if there were specific amendments that would address these issues, and there was the opportunity to consider the work group definition as amended. I know I have been encouraging that more and more strongly as the discussion went through. I don't know what an amendment would look like that would generate a satisfactory definition today. It sounded like there were 3 issues. One was the defined work group, defined location, which at least there seems to be discussion of satisfying that through education based on the work group discussion. The next one is the 4-year degree concern. And so I'm concerned that I didn't hear an amendment to address that. But we also go forward now at risk as not having a significant or a specific definition for these services. So can I just informally, is there any interest in addressing this issue right now in terms of a specific amendment to the work group definition that would define this? And if not, what is the expectation of the council going forward of, I now have a service that is approved that has a proposed definition that doesn't have a definition. So what should happen with applications going forward? Is there any? Ron?
Sean, I'm going to go back to my earlier comment. I don't think the definition's a problem for me. What's the problem is we're not addressing the other opportunities.
Okay.
If you were to come forward, or the council was to come forward and say, this definition as it stands is what it is, but we will go back to work on a second definition for professional temporary services, I would be comfortable. With this being brought forward as the only definition for temporary services, I'm uncomfortable.
Can you?
I can't give you an amendment to this. What I can give you is a willingness to work on a second definition.
So I have a concern I want to raise, which is that the Procurement Council does not originate these services the preferred sources are prepared to provide. Those applications come from a preferred source facilitating entity or more than one preferred source facilitating entity, and then that application is vetted, including the commitment to employ the disabled or individuals with disabilities or individuals that are visually impaired. So for the expectation to have been that this council was going to propose an additional definition, I think is not consistent with the council's role. The council's role is to review and approve those. And I would pose a simple question about that definition. Under the model you propose, who gets the check mark?
Sorry, who gets what?
Who gets the approval of the service? Because the approval of the service right now is an application as, there's a definition out there, but there was also the issue of who is eligible to provide that next service.
Let's go back. One, there was a vote, and you got a vote. Now it would appear you're arguing with the vote. 1. 2, I go back to that there is disabled individuals in that employment already. So we're requiring a new application, although there is already people in those positions. I still don't understand how the decision was made as to what items you will define and what items you will not define and require new applications. It would appear to me that you would define each item where there is already employment. I could be wrong, but I believe my right is to vote. And I
It
believe
absolutely
I've
is.
expressed my opinion.
It absolutely is, and we appreciate everyone's opinion. I'm only expressing a concern that, as the Procurement Council, with a recommendation on the table to have a firm definition, there is now a risk going forward, and if the Procurement Council has any suggestions on managing that risk, in the meantime, between now and a definition, we would be open to hearing that. But there is absolutely a vote that was cast on the table. So I'll take a couple comments, and then we have a number of other agenda items. Joel?
Thank you, Sean. Joel Lombardi, ITS. So in my current role, I'm no longer serving as an attorney, but maybe it's just because of my background. I know that, my thought process, and this is one of the things I'm really worried about now that we don't have an approved definition, is that, in fact, OGS can no longer approve any. That would be my concern, because there's no guidance at all, and so all these jobs would be lost, and that's one of the things that's been driving me forward, is to get it done right and to do it right the whole time. So, and it's not a rejection, it's just how do you go forward if you don't know what you're doing? It would be like telling my staff, go buy this, without giving them the procurement guidelines. They can't do it. So my concern now is that we're in this gray area. We have the OSC audit, which is perfectly clear, and we had the direction from the council. I put in personally a lot of time. I'll never get back. And now we're here. My recommendation to the council would be to not approve everything, because there's no guidance. And I feel your frustration and understand it. And my hope is that we can go forward with a definition with some concrete amendments if necessary, or if not, with another vote.
Winifred Schiff from the Interagency Council. I would like to propose some of the amendments that NYSID proposed to the definition. Specifically, in the first opening paragraph, to strike the words "in a defined office environment." And then number 3, same thing, in an office environment. And that would take care of the location thing without any question. And then 4B, to strike the words "a 4-year or higher degree," and that would satisfy my concern about the 4-year degree.
Can we just clarify, is the recommendation to completely remove office environment, or is it the defined office environment?
I would rather completely remove it.
So you would, by that definition, you would be including test takers, temperature takers, ticket takers, all of the field workers.
Well, I'm not proposing the amendments on page 2 that, talk about the field work, because I'm hoping that we can take some other action so that people don't lose their jobs. But I think that going forward, if we are going to do this right, that there should be no question that a traditional office environment is, less and less the case, and also with the 4-year degree, that it's too restrictive.
Okay, so the mechanics of I'm sorry, go ahead.
Hi, Lisa Davis from OPWDD. We just have a couple of comments, if you will. The first is relative to how procurement staff will be able to utilize the procurement hierarchy without having a definition broad enough to be able to meet the needs of being able to hire an individual with disabilities, but perhaps in a tight time frame. So I've heard a lot about, yes, we can do something, an OSC maybe can help us or whatever, but when you've got a quick turnaround on something and you've got to get, a person in place or whatever, and you go through the hierarchy to hire, you want to be able to know that you're going to be able to hire just what you need. So by not having something else in place, and again, I understand NYSID's responsibility to ensure that appropriate titles are offered, but by not having them at this point, perhaps that's not OGS or the council's issue, but
I think that is an issue, because from a procurement perspective, then all of a sudden, we're not going to be able to utilize preferred sources and then need to go to the OGS contract. So that is leaving a whole population out of consideration for jobs. So that is one of our concern. And another concern is when we have a need for nursing, I don't believe the OGS contract says nursing in a hospital or nursing in a doctor's office. It just seems like the site is very narrow. And I don't recall seeing, or same with sitter services, I don't believe that it says that a sitter service, it has to be at this location. And I think by having office on there is very limiting, and I don't think it defines the type of work, which is what the description of a job to me should be doing, is the type of work, not where the work is going to be done. I can see where clerical staff, traditional clerical staff work could be done in a warehouse. So it's not warehouse, it's not moving, driving one of those, big machines with pallets or whatever. It's actually some kind of clerical work that is needed in a warehouse, but there's no office because it's a warehouse, but it's not moving heavy things. Or in a mail room, it's not using those big photo replication machines or something like that. There's just more clerical work. So I guess I'm a little confused of why we have to define where it is to be, because that's, to me, not defining what a job title is. Thank you.
I think the intent was to limit the fieldwork categories that were in there, not to limit the work that was defined by the work group and its specific location. So I understand your concern. Just hang on one second. And are there any other comments? No. Okay. All right, so I try not to do this as the chair, but the mechanics of bringing this back up would be for someone to motion to reconsider the definition as amended with the amendments that Winifred had proposed. Does the council have any interest in that? It's not appropriate for the chair to raise that, but I could see those as friendly amendments.
I'd like to make a motion to consider a vote for the amendments that were proposed.
Okay. Is there a second for that? Second from Sean. Okay, so with that motion on the table, the motion on the table is a definition as the work group proposed with the following changes. And do we have them written down, or Winifred, do you want to repeat them?
The first is in the opening paragraph, on the second line, the words "in a defined office environment" would be stricken. And then actually in the third line, after administrative, there's a word "and" that would come out.
Okay.
And then number 3, 1, 2, 3, fourth line down, beginning approved, the words "in an office environment" would be stricken. And then number 4B, the words "a 4-year or higher degree or" would be stricken. And I want to just review it to make sure that I got it.
Yep. Does staff have all of those notes made? Yes. Okay. So, if there are no other additions, Winifred, so Amber, are you comfortable with the motion you're making to include all of those? Yes, absolutely. So, do you have it?
Yep.
Would you?
Right. So in the opening paragraph with the heading temp personnel office, after the word support, you'd put a period, and the rest, after assistance, you would put a period. So it would read, temp personnel office temps are workers hired for a predetermined period to provide program support and assistance. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. Then going down on bullet number 3 in the text, It would say the definition of temporary personnel office is a framework under which preferred sources are approved to offer support functions, period. In 4B, it would say any positions that require certification or license, including but not limited to. So you would get rid of four-year or higher degree, but it would still say any positions that require certification or license.
Thank you.
Is everyone comfortable with that reading? With that reading and with the motion and a second, is there any discussion about those amendments? Margaret Becker.
Margaret Becker, Office of the State Comptroller. I just wanted to clarify, we didn't fully understand location when we talked about it first. And so in this context, we know there are positions that are on subway platforms, test locations. By these changes, you weren't intending to add titles that were consistent with those jobs. We still have office titles as they're outlined in this definition. Rather, your point is they may be conducted at non-office locations, and I think you mentioned warehouse, for instance. That was a good example. It helped clarify for me. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, I'm only proposing the amendments that we discussed.
I see.
So we just have a moment there. And no other comments, questions from the council? Okay, then I think at this point we have a motion to call for a vote on the definition as amended as read by staff. At this point, would all council members in favor please voting in favor, please signify by raising your hand yes. Hold them up. Staff, okay, everybody?
Is that an aye vote?
Yes, that's an aye vote. Thank you. You guys got everybody?
You have to have opposed instead.
I know. All right, so now it's
I apologize for that. All opposed to the definition as modified, please signify by raising your hand. Okay, seeing none. Any abstentions? There's one. Do you guys have that as JP? Okay.
Did we get the ayes?
Sorry, everybody. Thank you. You set? Thank you, everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to give clarity to all of the agencies on how to move forward. We appreciate that. So that allows us to move on to new business. I'm supposed to, the motion passes, right? Okay, great. Moving on to new business, the 2018 Procurement Council meeting schedule. There are meeting dates and alternates. I am hesitant to use the late October Halloween alternate, so I'm hoping everyone will mark these down on their calendars, but certainly if you could look at your standing meetings and standing obligations and see if any of these dates will be challenging in 2018, we would appreciate that. Yes.
Always at 11 a.m.?
Yes. My understanding is always at 11. The goal is 11 to 1, and we'll see how we do here.
It's on the bottom.
Okay. Winifred?
I'm sorry, being very new and very concerned about the contract in question, what is the process for talking about grandfathering current workers and that? Like, when would that occur?
what kind of action, I'm not even sure I know what kind of action that would be.
I certainly don't know. But I'm
Okay.
concerned about moving on before those 102 people are assured that they won't be out of work.
Well, so there's now a definition, so anyone who is in a current contract will be able to continue on that way. And anyone who is not covered by that definition, there needs to be an application for a new definition, a new service.
In other words, lots of people will lose their jobs because of the, I guess
Again,
it's too late.
I'm not comfortable with the classification of causality,
Yeah, okay.
but yes.
Okay.
Margaret?
Yeah, Margaret Becker, Office of the State Comptroller. I think we share your concerns, and that's why I had mentioned earlier, and I know Mary Beth pointed out that there are other tools available, and not necessarily to this organization, right?
Okay.
And that's what we would very much like to urge the agencies affected, our partners in NYSID, PSP, to ensure that they are immediately taking whatever steps they need to make sure that whoever has been, I'm going to use the word stranded by this, perhaps, are not affected, because I think we share your concerns.
Thank you. Then we can discuss this later. Thank you.
There could be an application as well for new contracts.
I think they're discussing the immediate short term. Because any application would have to come back through the official process, so.
Yeah,
Hi.
can I clarify, just because I heard that, yeah. So, for anybody who hasn't been sort of following it, your comment suggested that any procurement alternative must follow another action by the Procurement Council, which I am not viewing as the case. I'm viewing there are other procurement options.
I think we were looking at it two different ways. One, for this council to have something to act on, there would need to be another application. However, there are other procurement tools that may be available to work that through.
Out of an abundance of caution that we not leave here with a misunderstanding.
Right.
I was referring to alternatives that didn't reside with this body.
Great. Thank you for providing that, Margaret. Mary Beth?
So I don't actually think this affects DOH, but if we have identified those individuals, if NYSID has identified those individuals, or OGS has, not every agency is involved in this conversation right now, so it might be helpful if OGS would reach out to those involved agencies and let them know they need to take action to preserve those positions.
We don't have a real clear line of sight. This is temp services, and by nature, we don't know who's employed at one particular point. If there's an existing contract that was already approved and is allowing the blind or visually impaired or the severely disabled to work, then that contract can go forward. If the contract expires and there's going to be a new contract, then what I was trying to say is we would get an application for pricing approval to respond to.
Okay.
And if,
Can I ask a question? I'm just sorry,
Go ahead.
because OGS, I'm hearing OGS saying that because you've already approved these individuals under an existing contract, you don't think that further action is needed until that contract expires or something changes. But an OSC auditor may not agree with that an OSC auditor that comes back and, comes around 2 years from now and looks at staff that are on contract in, January of 2018, post putting in this definition, may say that the agency has made a mistake by keeping those people on. So I just think that there needs to be some sort of notification to agencies, letting them know that there's a change and they should review their use of this particular service to make sure they're in line with the new definition. And if they're not, they need to take some action, whatever that action is.
Yeah, and we'll take that back as a staff action, but I believe the biggest issue is that there is an expired contract that didn't have a renewal that constitutes almost the entirety of these titles. Okay. So, I think the challenge is, wasn't the expiration of the contract notice, as opposed to, does there also need to be follow-up? But we'll take it as a staff activity to find that out.
we also put out a notification whenever there's a new definition added. We'll push out a procurement bulletin to let everyone know that there's been a change, whether it's a new service or a new definition to an existing service. So it'll be out there.
We'll take it as a takeaway to make sure that if there is notice that has to be provided, we will do that. Okay? All right. So we talked about the calendar. Nobody had major objections to meeting on Halloween. Will it be a Halloween party? Okay. Amber?
I do have a conflict that I am aware of now, so I wasn't sure if now is the appropriate time to suggest.
You certainly can, or you can, if you want to identify a conflict now, you can, or you can share it with staff later, whichever is easier. Which date's a conflict?
The January 31st.
Okay.
So the alternate date is.
So we'll make a note, and we'll combine that with other feedback from other council members, and we'll make that assessment. All right. But thank you for knowing about that. The next item on the agenda is to refer to council for OGS if there are any legislative updates. My understanding is that there are none. So in the interest of continuing on through time, particularly with Veterans Day being upon us, OGS thought that as a procurement-specific discussion, appropriate today would be to hear from an update on the service-disabled veteran-owned business program from Ken Williams, and we've invited him to do that. Thank you, Ken.
It's hard to believe it was 3 years ago, just over 3 years ago, that I first came in front of the Procurement Council, and a lot's happened since then. We're bringing up some slides, but while we're doing that, I'll give a brief. A number of you, I think, are new here and may not have heard me. I've been in front of the council 5 times, but this is a real success story, and we're very happy to do it. I'll just start running through.
Everybody on the council see around.
Yeah, in 2014, the governor signed the legislation that required 6% go to service-disabled veteran-owned businesses. We were up and running towards the end of the year, and thank you, I got it up now. So what it is 6%. Why? It's a thank you for your service program. Who is it? It's veterans who have a 10% or more service-connected disability, own 51%, and so on and so forth. I'm going to try to rush through this a little bit because I know we're running late on time. Here's the success story in a short period, and a lot of you are aware of it. As of Monday, I have 400 certified New York State SDVOBs, which is nation leading in the growth of it. Now, I can tell you that to date, of those 400, I have visited 80% of them personally before I certify them to make sure that they are legitimate and can perform. We've had over 63 million awards. This is information that Q2 is still coming in. Our annual report will have updates, but it's moving very well. The diversity of the group of SDVOBs is significant. A lot of people thought, including myself, that a lot would be construction related, but that's not really true. That's only a third. As an example, I just certified a few weeks ago a weather forecasting group that's also part of Startup New York. They're based out of SUNY Albany, and they, the people involved in that are people that did the weather forecasting for Air Force One and entities like that, and it's very exciting to have them on board. Breadth of specialized services. I'm not going to give you a chance to read it. It's just everything from drones to morticians to machine shops to home inspections to everything. There is a plethora of different types of businesses that are all ready to perform. I did a quick map of where the businesses are located. You'll notice that Plattsburgh has a void. I noticed that, and I said, why don't we have any businesses in Plattsburgh? There is an Air Force base up there, and I realized it's because I hadn't been up there doing the outreach. So I went up as of November 15th now. Next week, I guess I've got an event up there with the SBDC. The Chamber has sent out a flyer. We'll have a bunch of businesses up there shortly. But I realized living in Saratoga, I didn't go past Plattsburgh on my way anywhere. So, I had to make a special effort to do that. We also have businesses across the country. They have to have a significant New York State presence, and all of them do. All right. This is our new website. Criteria we got is just the OGS website /veterans. And when you get there, you find that we, after 2 years, finally got our new searchable directory. So all of you, if you go to the website, you can click on the link right there, and you can, it's a very robust directory search, right, Tom? And, and it helps. I just typed in quick and took a screenshot of the, typed in electronics, keyword, and this is what came up. We had 3 businesses in electronics. Then if you then click on the name of the business, you get, all the description of the business, included the NACE codes, the keywords, everything else. So it's quite robust. We still have the Excel spreadsheet up there. We still notify all the agencies and contractors and everybody that have given us their email addresses whenever we certify new businesses, and we will keep doing that. Contract inclusion requirements are very important. We still have issues where, some contracts are going out without including, what's required. All this information is on our website, and I think that's enough for that. We're here to help. We have a very small staff, but we do a lot, and we return calls, and we get everything else. Our contact information is there. Just a couple of notes. We have a number of businesses now on centralized contracts. We've got a list of that. The new database, actually pulls up centralized contracts and shows. We've had a couple big success stories on centralized, people being listed on centralized contracts. The most recent one is line striping, and we're constantly looking to get more and more of our business qualified to be on that. And I understand that OGS is looking into revamping the procurement guidelines, which are dated May of 2014, which predates our program. So right now there's nothing in there about the SDVOB, so we're excited to see that that's under consideration. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
I do. So I'm really intrigued by the description of the program, and I'm wondering if within that commodity code you have anybody who's actually engaged in farming and food, because we've seen a tremendous new increase at Cornell in the number of service-disabled veterans who actually go into farming.
Yeah, of the 400 businesses, I met with all of them. I know we had one that is no longer in business that we had, and I think I do, but we'll have to search that and look. So either you can search it. If you don't find it, get in touch with us. But I am looking for everybody's assistance. Okay, being a Vietnam era veteran myself, we veterans have a tendency to not trust programs, okay, as being real. All right, this one is proving to be real, and the fact that the reason I need to be on the road as much as I do is because they need to know that it's real, and they need to know that there's an old vet that is pushing everything. I need help getting the word out about the program. There are a lot of veterans who own businesses. Veterans may not have their, like myself, they may not have their service-connected disability. I could get it. It's a 10% or more service-connected disability, and I would qualify. I just have never done it. And so any of you that know in your in your workings, if you're hiring businesses or whatever, talk to them. Say, are you a veteran? I go up everywhere and say, are you a veteran? And if so, look into this, because this is huge. And we can grow the number of businesses, which helps the agencies then be able to meet their 6% goal and going forward. So, any other questions? Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ken. And I don't think it would be untoward to say that if there are other veterans in the room also, we recognize how important it is to have a holiday to recognize your contributions, and we appreciate that, so thank you. The next item on the new business agenda is a report out on applications for preferred source designation that were approved under the OGS standing authority. And for that, we'll ask John Normile to provide that report.
Okay, briefly, there were 5 applications, but they're all for nearly the same product. They were all submitted by the preferred source facilitator, NYS. The member agency was, or is, Herkimer ARC. The products are fall protection kits, 5 different configurations, but the items passed all the tests that we put them through before approval. ESD also approved the applications because they would have no significant impact. They're approved for all New York State users. I don't think there's anything more. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about the kits, the fall protection kits? That was it.
Okay. Thank you, John. And then the next item on the new business agenda is an application from the NYS PSP for preferred source designation of belt-equipped trauma kits. And so first we'll go to preferred source staff for OGS for their recommendation, and then we will hear from Empire State Development about their recommendation, and then we'll go to discussion. Is Carrie supposed to? I'm sorry. I skipped a line. I'm sorry, Carrie. So Carrie is going to present the application, and then we will have the OGS and ESD recommendations, and then discussion. Sorry about that, Carrie.
I thought I was getting off the hot seat. And I'll apologize ahead of time. I developed a small cough this morning, so I might have to take a water break. So, good morning, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hi, my name is Carrie Laney. I am the Executive Director of the New York State Preferred Source Program for People Who Are Blind, or otherwise known as NYS PSP. Thank you to the Procurement Council and OGS for affording us some time today to talk about our belt-equipped life-saving trauma kit application. A little background, the Preferred Source Program has been in existence since the 1940s. NYS PSP creates direct employment opportunities for New Yorkers who are blind who are otherwise unemployed at a rate of almost 70%. That is 70%. New York State Preferred Source Program and our affiliated nonprofit agencies are creating new taxpayers and pathways to economic independence. We are not a business, and this particular program is not about directing procurement to blind-owned businesses. Instead, it is about directly training and employing 400 New Yorkers who are blind who would otherwise likely be unemployed. And they earn their paychecks by providing value-added labor to what we produce, all working in New York State and all making at least New York State minimum wage. 2 years ago, we hit a historic high of $44 million. This includes state and local governments. It took us almost 70 years of the program's existence to get there, 70 years. This past year, we saw a dip to $42 million despite adding dozens of new products and several services in areas that make sense not only for our customers, but for our nonprofit partners, and most importantly, create opportunities appropriate for employees who are blind. The application before you today would otherwise be approved under OGS's standing authority. However, due to ESD's recommendation, we must seek Procurement Council approval today. The Council has adopted preferred source guidelines that speak to 2 relevant subjects on this matter: form, function, utility, and the impact assessment on New York State vendors and suppliers. So first, form, function, utility. There are different types of trauma kits available. Our proposed kit contains the following: a belt carrier, a tactical mechanical tourniquet, C-LOX homostatic gauze, CPR face shield, nitrile gloves, chest seal, and a 4-inch compression bandage. There are numerous labor steps to produce this kit, and 100% of that labor will be done by people who are blind or legally blind in New York City. And that labor is directly by our affiliated, our employees at the affiliated agency, at the agency location, not using corporate partners. And more information on the specific labor steps are in your package. The kit above is priced at a unit price of $62.29. And as OGS's recommendation memo states, on the centralized contract hazardous incident response equipment, there is a similar belt kit produced by Atlantic Diving Supply based in Virginia Beach. Our price is lower than their list price, which is $112. Ours is $62.29. So that's the form, function, utility. Next, I want to speak about impact assessment on New York State vendors and suppliers. As it relates to ESD's review, pursuant to this body's guidelines, the standard is to determine if there was, quote, significant impact to a substantial number of New York State businesses. That's what the guidelines say. And there are several points to make on this topic. First, of the unnamed WBE firms referenced on the top page of, at the top of page 4 of the ESD memo, I'm assuming they are the same 3 certified businesses identified in the March 28th update from OGS on the previously mentioned hazardous incident response equipment contract. You may be interested to know that we currently partner with one of those, Snappy Solutions, a WBE who works with our affiliated nonprofit in Buffalo to produce green cleaning supplies. So of those 3, none appear to provide specific sales numbers, which is consistent with OGS's memo stating it is a different vendor, Atlantic Diving Supply from Virginia, who is the only provider of an item similar to ours on the OGS centralized contract. For the other unnamed New York State businesses that may have some sales, those sales are despite the fact that another preferred source already offers a similar first responder trauma bag and related responder kit. So there is a preferred source already in this space, yet there may be some businesses that have some sales. Further references to nationwide customers or purchases from Port Authority in New York, New Jersey are not relevant because the state finance law in section 162 for preferred source does not apply to them. And as discussed at the last Procurement Council meeting, there's a lot of use of NAICS codes, which cover a very large swath of many different markets. They can capture thousands of items and related vendors that would not be the same form, function, utility, and they go way beyond the component parts of our proposed offering. I'd also like to point out of the 2 NAICS codes, 2 of the 3 NAICS codes, they capture wholesalers who sell directly to businesses, and therefore a customer base that is very different than ours. And again, Section 162 of state finance law does not apply to those businesses or their customers. Quickly, very quickly, these are the types of items that each of the NAICS codes referenced cover. 423450, medical, dental, and hospital equipment and supplies. That covers things like dental equipment, hospital beds, surgical instruments and apparatus, hospital furniture, medical and dental x-ray machines and parts. Not relevant to our application. NAICS code 424210, drugs and druggists, supplies, merchant, wholesalers. Again, the first 2 are wholesalers selling directly to businesses. We do not do that. Section 162 does not apply to selling directly to businesses. And those wholesalers are in the business of antibiotics, endocrine substances, in vitro, in vivo, diagnostic merchant supplies, botanicals, and vaccines, to name a few. And last, NAICS code 339113, surgical appliances and supplies manufacturing. Now this is a manufacturing area, and they are in orthopedic devices, prosthetic appliances, crutches, hospital beds, and operating room tables. I will acknowledge that surgical dressings are in this NAICS code, and that is one very small component of our offering. So the bottom line, while there might be a slight overlap in the component part with some businesses of one of the NAICS subcategories, I'm not aware of any New York State small business that offers the same form, function, utility kit to the same customer base as we are proposing. If there are limited sales, then it is despite the fact that another preferred source already offers a similar but not identical kit. NYS PSB position is the analysis behind the recommendation against our application does not support a finding that there would be, quote, significant impact on a substantial number of New York State businesses, and that is the standard set in the Procurement Council guidelines. In closing, we hope all programs targeted to those who have historically had challenges in procurement and employment opportunities are ultimately successful in leveling the playing field. We hope to do our part, and we hope everybody else is successful too. Thank you. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Carrie, before we do questions, we're going to go through the structure of the recommendations, and then if folks have questions, we'll ask you to come back, okay?
Okay, great. Thank you.
Would OGS present their recommendation?
We received the application on May the 1st and a revision to it on June the 2nd. Because of the proposed volume of sales, this would have fallen within our delegated authority to approve applications for a new commodity. There are 3 parts to the test. The first 2 fall to OGS. First, the preferred source price must be within 10% of the prevailing market. Second, the annual sales volume is less than $500,000. The estimated sales are well below $500,000. They're at just over $373,000. We found that there are expanded opportunities for direct visually impaired employment at the preferred source. The successful application will result in additional work for existing employees and provide the preferred source with a basis to provide ongoing employment. We found that there is value add in the work being done at the preferred source, that they are manufacturing the kits and the carrier. Finally, the staff findings, we found that the application is complete. It meets the requirements of the New York State Procurement Bulletin, Preferred Source Guidelines, Section 10D. Based on the labor steps described, OGS has determined that the value-added labor, manufacturing, producing, assembling, and repackaging meets the requirements of Preferred Source Guidelines, Section B 1 through 3. Third, OGS also finds the proposed price is within 10% of the prevailing market that was identified under OGS contract with Atlantic Diving Supply under the hire award. The application is for one commodity only. There are no services involved. Belt trauma kits, like the item proposed by NYS PSP, are available under centralized contract. There are no reported sales on state contract for these items dating back to June of 2015. And so finally, the staff recommends approval.
And then if we could ask ESD to speak to their recommendation, and then we'll move into questions and discussion.
Sure. So you have the recommendation in front of you, the letter memo that was sent in. Just to go over a couple points, as we've done now with all these that are coming up, we have to define a marketplace and the market demand, and we do have to use publicly available sources. And unfortunately, currently, there are no sources that actually drill down to the specifics, so we start from NAICS codes. I understand the NAICS codes are very big. What we do then is drill down to a subset, which is what we wrote in the memo. We drill down to a subset of 110. We actually physically call and email all of these people to see if they sell the same exact kit. I'd like to point out that NYS PSP pointed out that this is a similar but not identical kit that was before it, and that's the word identical. This is not a kit that has already been preferred source. This is a new application. What we do then with those NAICS codes is break it down. We broke it down to 110 firms that we actually went and talked to. Please note that all this is voluntary information, which is why the names are not disclosed, because of sensitivity. Someone has inappropriately used when we did disclose names before. So to protect the firms that are actually competing in this market, we are not giving out the names because this is sensitive information when they tell us how much sales they get and what agencies they do. So I understand that is a frustration. However, we have to also respect, because this is voluntary. If they do not give us any information back, we will have no market demand, because there's nothing under contracts currently to force people to tell us what their demand is. So if I point you to page, I think it's probably page 4 of this document, you'll see that there are companies, we did ask them, they sell this identical kit. There's one business that would lose 90% of its business, another one that would lose over 600,000 on page 5. We feel that that is bigger than the current demand. The demand that was proposed under the application was for only 373,000. We've already found more than that. There could be even more that we are not finding, and we do think it will be a significant impact on the businesses. In addition, there are several companies that will be used here. There are 3, as NYS PSP said, there are 3 women-owned businesses that actually sell the exact same plies used in the NYS PSP's trauma kits, as opposed to using 9 other businesses located in different states. So we would look to try to keep the actual sales here in the state of New York for state of New York businesses. So with that, based on the revenue that we were able to get from our voluntary sources as well as the spend, we denied the application to allow both NYS PSP to compete and small businesses that are already in the market to compete for this particular kit.
So now if there's any questions for any of the folks that reported, we'd be happy to take that. Any comments? Is there, Dan?
Yeah, Dan Clark, Omich. I guess I'm not sure who this question's for, but if the request is for 300,000, and let's say it ends up being 2.2 million, what happens? Does PSP end up having to give that back, or?
No, that means that small businesses can no longer compete in this.
No, I guess my question is, let's say they go over their threshold of 500,000. They just keep it, and they can, they have the new Tickle Me Elmo for the year. I guess that's my question is.
I'm either too old or too young for that reference, but I think the answer to your question is that an approval designation for this application is universal. It is not restrained by the proposed dollar amount that the NYS PSP proposes in this document. It becomes an approved commodity across the board whenever authorized users or whenever anyone covered by the law goes to buy that equipment. Other questions? Julie.
Julie Suarez, Cornell, and I'm sorry, I think it's because I'm so new here, I sometimes struggle to understand exactly what we're talking about in terms of the data, but I heard 2 different things. I heard John say that you did a search of the OGS database and didn't find any sales at all under this category from 2015, and then I heard ESDC's good survey data also saying that you found $600,000 from a company that would be impacted, and I struggle with how to reconcile the data between the 2 very, very different results.
You want to go ahead?
If you want to go ahead first, I don't mind.
Okay. There is a centralized contract with a private sector company. On their price list, there is a belt-equipped trauma kit that is near enough to be comparable to this offering. And in their sales reports to OGS, dating back a number of years, they've reported no sales of those kits to us.
And so what we do is we actually survey the businesses, we send them a survey, and then we follow up with an email and ask them, would you be willing to provide this data? And if so, with this exact kit, could you please tell us to what agencies and how much? And so that's the information that we get back. Like I said, all the data we have to do is we have to rely on the NAICS codes, which are too big. We admit that they, as greatly said, they include a lot of stuff. Those actually get us a base of companies to call and look at their website. So what we do is we look at all the websites. If we say, hey, you're not in it, you're out, you're out. And then when we get websites and companies that we know that sell similar items, we actually call them or email them. And for all the minority women-owned businesses that are certified, we also make sure all 23 of them that's in this were actually called and certified, because we know that they go through a certification process to get contracts with the government, so we want to make sure that we're not excluding them or their ability to compete. So it is based on data that we get from small businesses themselves.
Do you want to go ahead?
We have learned that there are different types of trauma kits. Some may be put together to be in a patrol car or to be larger. One of the preferred sources we spoke with at GovBuy is putting together what they call an active shooter response kit, be much larger. It would be installed in a building. So we know there are different types of kits that are out there.
And I should just point out, small businesses not only support, this designation also does local municipalities. So when we ask them, we ask, is it for the state? Is it for any local municipality in New York State? So the designation carries through all the way level. So OGS only really looking at New York State, actual state contracts, as opposed to all the city or the municipality contracts. So that's another distinction.
So if I can give an application agnostic answer also, state agencies have a requirement to buy off of state contract. Not all of the authorized users of the contract are required to purchase off of the contract. They may issue their own contract, or they may otherwise engage other vendors. So it is possible for both of those things to be true and not to be conflicting, because it is absolutely possible that a local government or anyone else not mandated to buy off of the state contract found the existing NYSID trauma kits not to meet their form and function, went out for a separate solicitation, or however they engaged another vendor in a contract, and that kit may or may not, just agnostically, my answer is, the answer is you can be considered, did it conflict? So it is possible to see zero sales on a state contract and also to see other sales from other levels of government that would be affected by this designation. Does that help? Okay. Are there any other questions, comments? So I saw Winifred first, but I'll come back. Winifred?
Thank you. There's a very similar contract held by another preferred source, and I'm a little bit concerned about the effect that the award of this contract would have, but I can't explain it as well as there is somebody here, Suzanne Bakowitz. Can I defer to her to explain it more thoroughly?
You can, for limited comment on that subject.
Okay.
So procedurally, if a committee person does want to delegate your speaking time to someone else, you can do that, but our expectation is that it will be time constraint as we would expect the Procurement Council members to be.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Councilwoman Schiff, and thank you to the Council for allowing us this time to present some information to you regarding the belt trauma kits. Regarding the negative impact that approval of a duplicate life-saving trauma kit would have, as proposed by NYS PSP, we have many workers at Herkimer Industries, which is the arc of Herkimer, that would be impacted by approval of this. Herkimer Industries bought a medical kit to market 3 years ago that was approved by New York State OGS with the authorization to proceed issued on 9/8/14. The components of our ODK kit have been field tested and proven successful at saving lives. The components are the same that are used by the United States Army for the benefit of the warfighter. As a citizen of the great state of New York, I would hope that our first responders would have the best tools available to save the lives of my family members and yours. Since 2014, we have produced approximately 25,000 life-saving kits and growing that have been used many times to save the lives of crime victims, accident victims, and law enforcement officers in New York State. Our workers in Herkimer County, New York, people with significant developmental and physical disabilities, cut and sew the carrier, kit the components, as well as package and fulfill orders of these kits. This product creates jobs for Mary and her many co-workers, providing them a paycheck and a huge sense of self-worth. They're very proud of the lives that their work has helped to save. Just this week, 2 NYPD officers saved the life of a severely injured construction worker dying from blood loss. They used their agency-supplied Officer Down kit to prevent the death of a young man with a wife and family. This was our kit. This is just one of the most recent examples of how this kit has saved lives by being available when needed. There are many more, but this kit has done so much more than save lives. It also provides meaningful employment for people with disabilities, a population with the highest rate of unemployment in our state and our communities. Developing duplicate products does not increase employment. It just shifts it from one agency to another. How do I explain to Mary that she is losing her job because a decision was made that someone who is blind is more deserving of the work than her? What makes someone like Mary, a person with severe developmental and physical disabilities, less deserving or disabled than someone with a visual impairment or blindness? By adding products that have the same form, fit, and function as an existing product approved on the program, this only pits agency against agency, disability against disability, and threatens existing jobs. Heading down this path will weaken a program designed to enhance lives, not defeat them. The creators of this program had the foresight to protect the rights of people with disabilities. You are the guardians of this critical program. We ask that you give careful thought and consideration to the impact your decision will have on the existing jobs of people with disabilities, people like Mary. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Would you stay for a minute? And Carrie, would you come up? My question is, can you address the form, function, and utility question specifically and identify the content of your kit? And then Carrie, can you reiterate the content of your kit so I could understand that difference, please?
And I'd like to just bring Mike Lamb up for the question session,
As
please.
long as it's specific to that question.
Good morning. Our kit has a tourniquet, the nylon pouch that all the components go into, a 4-inch pressure bandage, nitrile gloves, quick clot hemostatic agent, and a CPR shield.
And Carrie, it's your application. I want to make sure you have the opportunity to respond also. I heard at least one major component gap, but I think for the council, would you identify that and so that it can be discussed of whether it's a significant issue or not?
Sure, absolutely, and thank you for the opportunity. So one of the things that jumps out at you is ours is proposed to be a belt carrier that is worn by first responders. So I think that would be one of the primary differences in terms of the form, function, utility. And further, if I may, there's a lot of examples across all three preferred sources of generally being in the same space, but that space being different form, function, utility. I think of cleaning supplies right off the bat, and it goes to having things available that employs people across served by all three preferred sources that meets the customer's needs, and they're very specific form and function and utility. I would also point one last thing, if I may. In the hierarchy of procurement mechanisms available to state and local governments, you would start with preferred source, then you would go to a centralized contract, and then you would look to other procurement mechanisms. And I didn't see any local governments listed here on the ESD memo. It was just New York State customers, so they must have bypassed NYSID, bypassed the centralized contract, and looked for other procurement mechanisms to have any of those purchases if they did. And so I have to assume they're different form, function, utility needs.
So can we just, for the purposes of the council, can we just compare the content of the items? And certainly if I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name when you came up. Mike, if we could just compare the items that are in there and how they're worn. Are they both worn on the belt? Yes. Do they both contain the same equipment? Because there's a discussion of whether it conflicts with the product you're providing or whether it conflicts with the product that is also being bought separately from that. So there may have been an agency decision that yours doesn't meet their form and function that now overlaps with this also. So I think it's really relevant to understand what the difference is in these kits. Can anybody help me do that?
Let me, if I may, just jump in and say that the only component listed under their kit versus ours is an Asherman chest seal. The design of the Quick Clot product is such that it actually is inserted directly into the wound to stop the bleeding, which is more beneficial than a topical seal that goes over the top.
So that's
That's
content difference
one
between them
content difference.
that
But
different law enforcement agencies, so I know you've presented it as one is more valuable than the other. Are there folks that would use trauma kits that would disagree and would prefer to use one or prefer to use the other?
I'm sure that there are many different opinions on what they prefer to use.
Okay.
Oftentimes, each law enforcement agency or security firm will have something that they've gotten used to using in the course of their training over the years, and so that may be something that they, because they're familiar with it, choose to use. But I do know that the Quick Clot product, which is in our kit, has been vetted through the United States Army. It is the preferred product of the Army. So it certainly fits the function required for what it does.
And that's all. I just want to make sure for the council that there is clarity.
Yes.
Carrie, do you have anything else you need to add specifically on form, function, content of the kit that would give clarity to the council on what's in the kit?
I do think there's the minor difference as mentioned, and I would also point out that they're offered at different pricing, which supports the idea that there's different elements to the
Okay.
offering.
All right. Do we have any?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. We getting ready for the meeting, we did research into the contents of the different kits. What we found out, fortunately, there's a guy in the office is a veteran trained medic. We asked about the chest seal, the Beacon chest seal. That's for use with a sucking chest wound. You're trying to prevent a collapsed lung. It's an important form function utility item. The method of action between NYS PSP's offering, the Celox hemostatic gauze and the Quick Clot hemostatic gauze, they are different. Quick Clot, I believe, was first to market, was used in Iraq and Afghanistan. The military does now use Celox as well. But I think the key component is the chest.
So there are distinguishing characteristics. So I wanted to make sure the issue got vetted because so there is an order of precedence in addition to preferred sources than the OGS contract. The order of precedence is on a commodity is Corecraft, then it is NYS PSP, then it is NYSID. So there is an order of precedence inside the preferred sources also, without judgment from me, but only as information that is relevant to understand this discussion. So there's a discussion about whether this impacts the kit that has already been approved to another preferred source. If they overlap enough and both meet the form and function and utility, there is an order of precedence that would be established by this vote. And then there is the other discussion about the other kits that may be being purchased and the overlap with them. So does that clarity help or make it worse? Both. Okay. Mary Beth, then Tom.
So while they're both at Maya and while they're both at the podium, can I just ask, because on the PSP application it says that it's 0.57 FTE, so a little less than 1 FTE would get a job here. How many people does NYSID?
According,
I heard Mary.
yeah, we went back to the application they had.
Why don't you share as staff, and then if we have any conflicts, you guys can help us with that also.
Okay.
All right.
NYSID's application 1105C from September of 2014. That was when it was approved. Sorry. 0.394 FTEs. It's described as a compact officer down kit. It seals with a zipper. Their application 1251-C was approved July of 2016. Compact officer down kit, seals with Velcro, has 0.50 FTEs. NYSID's offering application 1353C that was approved by OGS under our standing authority in October of 2017. It's a different item. It's a vest-mounted officer down kit, and it supports 0.10 FTEs. 0.010 FTEs.
Okay. Are you comfortable with that, or do you have anything to add to those numbers?
If, I'd just like to clarify that what it stands for in jobs based, because when we submit an application, we base it on an approximation of what we believe annual sales will be. So with the fact that we've done over 25,000 kits, the number of jobs has increased. We're currently at between 10 and 20 jobs on that product line, depending on the size of the order that we receive.
I'm sorry, you're up from just over 1.5 to 20? Can I just make sure that they're being counted the same way? Can you just confirm full-time employee hours, which is the standard of measure being used in both applications?
What Suzanne is talking about is that's how many people work on the product when we get an order, and that's how many people are involved in it. On FTEs, I would have to go back to my quarterly employment report to find that number for you.
Okay, just proportionally, even though there may be 20 people at that moment working on it, right, do you believe it's 20 FTEs?
No, I don't.
Okay, right. So there's some increase from the 3 applications, right, but not to 20, exactly, because those other folks are working on other things.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Thank you for the clarity. Mary Beth, does that answer your question?
I guess. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't sound like we don't really know the answer, but they do seem comparable to me.
At least at the moment of application.
Both about a little
right,
less than an FTE.
Tom?
Tom Ipshin from SUNY. Just to clarify, a question for Carrie, but also for John. You said that the application that NYSID was approved by OGS was not a belt, but a chest?
They have 3 separate offerings.
Oh, okay, I missed that.
2 are belt and 1 is
okay,
a vest mounted.
thanks. And in the application, Carrie, you have the description, and it says can be customized to meet the customer requirements. What does that mean in terms of if we approve for these items here, how would it be customized but still stay within this application?
That's a good question. We do like to put it out there for customers if this particular offering at that particular price point, which is what we're seeking approval, doesn't meet their needs. Then, of course, with all of our kits, we can customize and present with a new, different array, and that would be at a different price point, and we would be back here to get an approval on something if it was different in the form, function, utility.
Okay, so you're not requesting.
I wouldn't be able to do that and while also seeking approval for the price.
Are there any other questions? If there aren't, is there a motion on the table to, I guess the way the proposal from staff to the council is that there would be a motion to approve. So because what's laid on the table is the application that's in question. So is there a motion to approve? Okay. Seeing none, there's no action to be taken on this application right now, which would automatically mean that NYS PSP would not be able to provide it right now.
As a preferred source.
As a preferred source item, obviously, it would be available. Okay, seeing no recommended actions from the council. That brings us to open council discussion on the, I'm sorry, hang on. I apologize. The rules of the council require a vote either way. They require us to take an action. So we either have to approve or disapprove the application. And I apologize for not having that at my fingertips, but that is a requirement. So because the application requires a vote be taken, I will, hang on. Okay, So the chair will entertain a motion either way, a motion to approve or a motion to disapprove, but the council does have to take an action. Okay, Pravina makes a motion to disapprove. Julie, are you seconding it? Great.
I have a Tom Hipson question. So if we're making a motion to disapprove and it does not pass, does that mean it's approved?
It's a great question.
Oh, before I vote.
That's a great question. Hang on a second. Right, but if they don't, if a disapproval doesn't pass.
Right. So I would be, if ESD would like to withdraw that, I'll be happy to propose that we vote in the
Motion
affirmative.
to approve. Okay, so let's do it that way because we know the result. Thank you, Pravina. Tom makes a motion to approve. Is there a second for a motion to approve for consideration of a vote? Margaret, thank you. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor of approving this application, please signify by putting your hand up. Okay. Did you guys get everybody? Me and Tom. All opposed to approving this application, please signify by raising your hand. Okay. Would you raise your hands a little bit higher? We're working on the new model that we know where you're sitting. We just need to be able to see your hands. Okay. Did you get everybody? Judy? Sorry, bear with us. We are eventually going to give you a tool to do this electronically. I promise. Okay. All right. And then abstentions. Seeing two. You guys see John and Winifred? I can wait for the official count if you want, but visually it is obvious that it did not have the votes to pass, so the application is not approved. Thank you for going through the mechanics of that. Each time we do this, I find an additional set of rules we have to follow. Sean, do you have the count? Would you guys report the count? How many in favor, how many against? 2 in favor, 11 against, 2 abstentions? 1 recusal. I'm sorry, Ron. I have again forgotten to ask you to recuse yourself, and I apologize for that.
I had you covered.
I appreciate that, and luckily they never let me forget, so it's a good thing. Okay, so that application has not passed. The next item on the agenda is open council discussion. I know I have begun discussions with folks about new items to talk about, but we haven't necessarily firmed some of those up yet. There is an invitation to the council. If you have concerns or items that you want us to consider for future discussion, please bring that up. I also owe Alex an answer from the last meeting. I should have done that in old business. I apologize. There is a mechanism to add members to the Procurement Council. But the mechanism is statutory because the council itself is constituted under law. So there is not another mechanism to do that. The mechanism is to have a legislative action to amend the size of the council. Okay? Go ahead. Absolutely. We'll provide that, and if anyone is curious, we're happy to provide that to everybody on the council.
It's State Finance Law 161 is the statutory reference that constitutes and says who the members are and what their terms are.
Okay. So I apologize for not doing that under old business, Alex. Is there any other open council discussion on any subjects? Winifred and then Amber.
I am a very new member who obviously have a lot. I have a lot of questions. and not sure of procedural things, and I was wondering if other new members would find it helpful to have some sort of an orientation. If not, then, we could do it separately, but there could be some benefit in a group.
I think we would encourage that. And I think we tried to begin doing that process, but certainly if there was a desire for, so how about we do this? Anybody who has a desire for an orientation or reorientation to the workings of the council, please send staff a note in the next week, and we will work on putting that together before the next council meeting. Yes, absolutely, we'd like to provide that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Amber?
Also, as a newer member, I wanted to know, this is something, we talked about possible, topics for next meetings. Something that came up with a member of ours is the issue of best value versus lowest cost in bidding, where there are lots of examples of this, but where, the best value metrics aren't as clear to the procuring agency. And I would like to look at other examples from other, I know there's a situation right now where they're looking at other examples in other states where they have good metrics. And I'd like to know if, when we could bring up that for a robust discussion and see where we can maybe make some changes.
So I think what we want to do is figure out what the mechanics are for discussions of topics that may or may not have action items. There may be a time frame we can set, those sort of things. I don't know that we've sorted all of that out yet. So we'll take that under advisement, and if you would also forward follow up with staff to the council and put the details out of that, then we will figure that out. I don't have a better answer other than yes, we'll take that under advisement right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Other open topics for discussion. Alex, do you have anything?
Yes, just a quick question referring to the update regarding SFL and adding members to the council. It's traditionally based on the staff's experience and what's happened in the past. Are amendments to the SFL regarding the council, are they usually made during budget as an Article 7 or during legislative session? Or does it really depend on what the amendment is?
So broadly, I think it depends on what the amendment is, but I think to some extent there has been action of the legislature outside of this discussion. So outside of, I'm not sure all of the changes to that legislation have been asked as questions to the Procurement Council first. They've originated as from the legislative session. Go ahead.
Can you use?
Do you have if you have an answer?
No. Can you pull the mic up to you?
Yep. I'm going to defer to somebody smarter than me.
No, just older. Jerry Minot, Chairman from DOB. I was here when the Procurement Council was created. And at that point, it was a joint executive legislative group that met from about August through that budget season. And the first laws in this whole area came about. Since then, there have been a combination. There have been a combination of legislative submissions for changes and voting it that way. And then there have also been cases where the executives had Article 7s to tweak it also. So it's basically, since then, it's been 1, 2, or 3 groups getting together and making proposals and agreeing to it.
So it just all depends on what's happening and
Exactly.
what the intent of the amendment is. And just to piggyback on that question then, is the staff aware of any changes for the statute via an Article 7 that are being proposed or worked on for the upcoming budget season?
I don't know that we have a complete line of sight into that, but not that we know of. Sorry, any other open council discussion? No. Seeing none, would everybody like to go home? Okay. The chair would very seriously entertain a motion to adjourn. Tom motioned, Jerry seconded it. All in favor? Could you show of hands, please? Any noes? Anyone who would like to stay longer? No. Any abstentions, recusals? Okay. Seeing none, the last meeting of 2017 of the Procurement Council is adjourned, and we will see everybody on either January 31st or a date that or the alternate date, depending on people's availability. Also, so the laptops, the purpose of the laptops are for the meeting right now. We have not enabled them to work on Wi-Fi that's not in this room. So for now, please leave those. We don't know what the long-term policy is going to be. But they're definitely not set up with all of the resources you would need as a council member yet. So if you could leave those, that would be great.